See what they can't see, know what they don't know. Every hidden path, every open door. This is Recon at Horizon 3.
Hi, welcome to Recon at Horizon 3, our engineering podcast. I'm Chris Corbett. I'm our Vice President of Engineering, and today I have one of our AI research staff members with me, Kerri. And Kerri, could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Kerri Prinos, and I am a member of the research staff here at Horizon 3, and I've been leading the research efforts to build autonomous proactive defense systems on Noxus team.
Awesome. And I think I've given an outline of some of the things we've covered in other podcasts where we go into maybe a recent piece of work that you're proud of, and then more of a day in the life, and then some of your kind of background and what led you to us at Horizon 3. And we can kind of interleave those all as well. But I know you guys have, and you specifically have spearheaded some really interesting work, applied AI work, and released some papers about that. Could you give us a little overview, a deep dive on one that you're proud of?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can talk about the first paper that our team put out, and this one is exciting because it was putting together the framework and the architecture for our autonomous defense system. And specifically, it includes, an attack agent and a defense agent that interact and make each other stronger through this like learning loop. And so the attacker will kind of probe weaknesses for the defender, and the defender in turn then tries to predict what the attacker is going to do next and put out defenses there, or increases visibility via logging or something like that as well. And so the cool thing about this architecture was that we were trying to solve a specific problem that I think a lot of people who've worked with agent systems and LLMs have come across with, which that it's very hard to get sometimes reproducible results. LLMs are non-deterministic. So every time you might type in a response, you'll get something different back, which can be really good for like creativity and exploring different search spaces and ideas. If you're trying to write or generate code. But if you're trying to understand and reproduce results, or if you want to make sure that you're getting like the best answer every time, it can be hard from like an explainability standpoint to know why you got one result versus another. The other problem is that they also have a tendency to hallucinate or kind of come up with like information that you're not sure where they came from or go off task. And then also some studies have also shown that, they can be capable of doing even more like damaging behaviors in response to requests that, we might not think of, for example, like deleting an email server or taking other actions in environment. So when we have something like cybersecurity, we want to be especially careful when we introduce agents into an environment to be and have any control over decision making. And so for our framework, what we wanted to do is we wanted to keep as much of it, design it so that a lot of it was controlled and deterministic, and that the LLMs were taking agency over specific tasks and trying to use that creative reasoning to find like the best policy options and quickly look through a search space. But ultimately, we had particular structure around it and formal guarantees that, it wouldn't make the defense system worse. It wouldn't go off policy. And so for that design, I brought in some things from my background in electrical engineering and control theory. A lot of the professors I'd worked with that kind of taught this, they're working with flight controllers for military and commercial pilots. And so, obviously those systems have to be super safe, and you really need to understand if there's any disturbance to that system, like what's going to happen, different limitations and bounds. And so that seemed like something that, would be good for our problem as well. And it's been something that's been discussed in the literature as like a potential solution to control these agent systems. But what our work did is showed the first like machine verified proof. We were able to check and demonstrate that these properties held. And so that our system, the agent system, as it was proposing new defense postures, we didn't have any hallucinations where it made up like EDR policies that didn't exist. We also didn't see ever that it made decisions that made the defense worse. And we also saw that we had like a degree of stability, and we could kind of like characterize the bounds of how much damage the attacker was going to cause. And so it didn't necessarily mean that the defense was going to win every time, but it did mean that we could understand, how bad like the disturbance on the system from the attacker would be.
Awesome. And I know, your charter is applied. And as we get into a little bit more about kind of your day to day, I think we'll hear, how much you're interacting with various teams. But, this is at the frontier of things that we may end up incorporating into or parts of it into the product. But what's your sense in terms of kind of the product applicability of this style of research?
Yeah, absolutely. So for for this type of research, I think some of it goes in stages, and I feel like part of the nice thing, I work really closely with one of our product managers, Amy, and then also with our manager, Knox, who has a lot of experience within the cybersecurity world and then also on the sales side. So he brings a lot of that like applied, like real world knowledge to the table and like constraints and things like that. And then Amy also keeps us grounded in like what is real for the product and things. Because I think research you can definitely go off and explore different directions and sometimes you can move ahead at what's possible. But I feel like we always want to come back to delivering. So one of the things we're looking at is doing just in stages. And so if we take this system and we have it more be like to the side and like recommending rather than having like a live agent in the environment, the first stage is kind of have it to be separate. You feed in logs from your defense telemetry from like an EDR platform and then also from Node Zero. And then we can use that and the agents will recommend policy changes. We have this actually built up in a live environment now where an agent auto deploys and changes the policies in real time and like after
Very
pen
cool.
tests, which
Yeah.
is super cool. But it's definitely that would be like a step further in the product. One of the things I'm most excited about is that we started a research design partnership with some of our customers around this work. And so to again try to translate into a little more of reality. And that's been so helpful to me. Is we've had the opportunity to meet with several different customers and they've talked about how do they use the EDR, what problems are they actually seeing and what would they like fixed. So it's no longer something abstract because a lot of what I'm seeing is like, there are a lot of attempts to kind of solve this problem. What's your optimal defense configuration? But if we're not focusing on things that customers care about, then, we're not really doing like our job for them. And so knowing about like if it's like overhead computation, if it's the number of false positives that they're seeing. It's like extra noise. Like what are the problems that is making it challenging? Even just the correlation of like the Node Zero logs to EDR can sometimes be challenging as something can be manual process. So that's kind of how we're trying to tackle that. But I'm loving having that chance to do that and make it sure it becomes something real for our customers too.
Awesome. And as part of this work, what was kind of the most technically challenging or something where you realized that it was maybe harder than you thought? Or what was a moment where you're like, oh, what have I gotten myself into?
So I would say, okay, so there are a few things I think that come up. The first one I would say is the correlation piece has been no small feat. I think it was something that when you initially started, it was kind of like, oh, we're just going to use like some timestamps and line up like the Node Zero data with the EDR. But there was a lot more to it, and so some of the alerts don't come with like timestamping. The other thing is like, so just even going back for a minute for like the testing environment. So the EDRs themselves have now all this like built-in AI capabilities, which are amazing and really help your defense. But they make it very challenging when you're trying to evaluate like how well does my agent or how well does my algorithm work. So when we're trying to see like, does my correlation, are we matching Node Zero events to all the EDR events? Sometimes what we're seeing is that not all of the EDR events are there because the system will have tried to like filter out the events for you to like ease the load on the SOC analyst who's looking at it. But then it makes it challenging for us
And
because
you're
we're
like,
trying to
but
see.
my AI SOC analyst
Right,
needs all the data. Like, give me all the data.
exactly. Yes, exactly. And so that's been something that we've been trying to figure out of like how, first of all, like, are these false positives or false negatives, or are they actually like the product of like you're saying, like, did they filter it out for us and it was being super helpful, but we just didn't realize. So that's been something that has definitely come up that we're looking into. And also I think with that work too, like what parts you could just throw like, this large agent at it or like what process like do we want to take? Are there things if we can do it deterministically and fast? I feel like that's ideal. But then maybe there are other parts that require some more complex decision making. And maybe we'll hand that over to like a smaller AI model or, maybe it's something larger. But I feel like that's been something that we're really diving into now. And it's been a really cool process of like, we thought the hard part was going to be like some of the recommendations and we actually even took a step back and we're like, okay, correlation first, and this is more challenging than we thought.
Yeah. And in terms of, has any of this work created any patents? I know we have a lot of active kind of patent work within the company.
Yeah. Yes. So super excited. Actually, we did get our first patent application filed for this work for building this autonomous defense system that'll, tune like an EDR platform and fuse the offensive and defensive telemetry. Part of my top thing for like any of the research that we're doing has been that like IP protections come first, and also that we want to put things out that we're proud of. And so ahead of doing our first uh, our first paper and publishing that on archive and all, I worked closely with Devin and the Flare IP team to make sure that we had that patent submitted and covered. And they've been fantastic to work with. We also worked with them on our the future one, which is a little more on the building out the system for deceptive defense and other types of defense work as well. But yeah,
And was that your kind of first part contribution to a patent? Or I know that you have, a career in, other very innovative areas, prior to coming to us, but how
yeah.
did it compare if it wasn't your first?
Yeah, so actually was my first one for the patent, which I thought was really cool because I had done more work in like the academia and like paper writing and things like that, and like it was so cool to learn some of the aspects that like what's like novel from a perspective of like a patent versus there's differences of like what might be something that's like publishable and a novel contribution to like academia and things like that as well. And so that was really interesting to like kind of learn through some of those lines and like finding the nuance of that. I think also the just the process too, it reminded me of probably the closest a little bit of like some of the review processes we'd have coming out of like defense of like trying to make sure we have everything protected before other types of like disclosure and things externally. But yeah, that was the first one, so super exciting.
Yeah, and maybe we can get to a little bit of a day in the life. And I know, there's a typical day, which may, vary, but maybe you can ground us in, you know, I don't know, like last Tuesday or something. What were you doing that day? I imagine you're meeting with some people, you're doing some code dev. Like, put us in your shoes or in the seat,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
definitely. So we have a team that's been growing, but we're still very close. And so we have like daily stand-ups each day, which has been nice, even as the team has kept growing. So usually it's meeting with Knox and Lily and Cam, and now it's grown to include one of our interns, Arian and Garrett from the attack team. We have Jim and now Mitch who've joined as managers in like the precision defense space, helping us with the EDR effort in Amy as well from the product side. And so usually I'll start off the day just going through and hearing updates from everyone, which I always like. It's just helpful to kind of like plan my own day, and also just like I like hearing the context for what everyone else is working on. Depending on, what we have going on, I would say a lot of it's divided between these past weeks have been a lot of like paper writing and experiments for our latest upcoming work. And I would actually say too that we just kicked off like formally two of our like research programs. And so a lot of my work has also been on more writing up like proposals and trying to define the scope of like what do we want to get out of this from a research perspective, and working really closely with Amy to make sure too that we see a path with the product. And so for like the EDR work, for example, kind of trying to do like a roadmap of product demos and papers and different things we can deliver by the end of the year. And then also on this like newer effort that's more on the deception work that Snehal's proposed, we've been also trying to first even just frame the problem and see like what experiments and things do we need to run just to even get our heads around like what's going to happen.
Awesome. And so for that kind of running experiments portion of the day, and maybe let's focus on things that we've already, had patents or talked about publicly.
Yeah.
For that, could you, put me in your shoes for, how are you running the experiment? How are you orchestrating it? And how are you analyzing the results in this modern era of agentic dev?
Yeah. So I would say one of the things that I've loved about getting to work with some of the agentic tools is that my background doesn't come from like more of a software engineering side, and so I definitely like coding and things are things I'm like comfortable with and have learned, but it's always been on more of like a prototyping and like earlier like production style thing. And so one of the things that I love too is that with the agent tools, it's super helpful for me to just go through and I go through like research papers, I'll read them and I tend to like identify the kind of gaps and like directions that like have seemed to be like left open. But one of the things is like I can iterate really quickly and test all sorts of different things. So for example, when I was developing the agent system with the control theory aspects and things like that, one of the just from like the very starting formation, one of the very like first pieces was to define like the game theory structure of it. And so how did I want to model the attacker and the defender interacting together? And I think I went through probably like 10 different like models from literature of doing that. And so I would just I would work with like Claude to just iterate and do some initial, data analysis is just like getting some like initial code structure in there. And I am somebody who's very visual, so I would do like Jupyter notebooks or Claude is actually great for doing like visualizations and like HTML pages and stuff. And so just being able to like click through the results and check and see what is working, what isn't, and then kind of iterating and refining on that. But that's been super cool where I think about like, to go through that many different tests of code, it would have probably taken me a lot longer. So it's cool to be able to see really quickly, like, how is this working? What wasn't working? Things like that. And also for automating like experiments and stuff too. So even just doing stuff like the bash scripts and things like that are just like, they're not like super complicated, but just a little time consuming. So just having it being able to kick off like a run of like 40 trials by, it ends up being super nice. And yeah, the recent work I'm working on that we have a paper coming out soon and we have a patent filed as well. I actually ended up doing like kind of a content analysis of like what the agents or the LLM models were outputting. And so what kind of reasoning text were they using and seeing what kind of code words came up the most often. And I remember doing this process like before AI and like using the command F to like search through everything. And it was quite a different experience getting to, just be able to quick like draft up some Python scripts with regex. And that was really a nice thing. So I think it's been a cool thing. It's been kind of like, it allows me to get to like kind of the fun parts of the research and like thinking and designing. So I like that.
Yeah, and get the answers a little bit sooner to inform kind of the larger experiments.
Yeah,
That's what I was
definitely.
thinking when you were describing kind of all those smaller game theory kind of
Hmm.
analyses, that's going to inform the choice of what you do for the next stage. And then you're able to
Yeah,
make that choice either quicker or in a more informed manner. And
absolutely.
in terms of these larger experiments, are you running, on your local machine? I know we have this cyber range internally. Are you using that? Or tell me about, where you're running these experiments.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, a lot of them end up being a local computer, but I feel like the most exciting one is in the cyber range. And so Lily and I had written up a paper that was, setting up this. We almost called it like an agent gym style thing. So if you've seen like OpenAI has mentioned, they have like a reinforcement learning gym for agents, which is a way of evaluating lots of different algorithms and comparing them in an environment. And so there have been a lot of takes on that for cybersecurity, which is amazing. And there have been some takes on that for evaluating like what we think of agents, like the Claudes and the different things like that. But one of the gaps was that, they didn't tend to interact with real tools. And so they would use things like simulations or even like open source EDR was probably the highest fidelity. But there was none with like commercial EDR or real commercial tools integrated, which I mentioned earlier too. Like those tools have they're not quite designed for this type of benchmarking. They have their own like AI. So if you're tuning them with AI, it's a little of like an AI interaction there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and so it ends up being important to have that setup. So right now what we have a setup is we have in the cyber range, we have a setup where we can kick off Node Zero runs. It can run a pen test against, we have 3 EDRs hooked up now. We have Sentinel-1, Microsoft Defender, and CrowdStrike. And so you can run a pen test against an environment with one of those present. It will automatically then pull the logs from each of those sources, so from Node Zero on the offensive side and EDR telemetry from the defensive side, and fuse those and feed it to our agents, which will then decide to make policy changes and they will push those and update the EDR all without you interacting with it. And then from there, it'll kick off another pen test to see like what was the effect. And so that was a super cool system. Lily Brush was a huge part of that design. She did really amazing work. And yeah, we were able to run like a sample benchmarking through that and kind of take away some lessons learned about, some of those things I mentioned with like the challenges of using those real systems. But yeah, we're very fortunate we're able to do that. I know a lot of research just even down to cost, those other tools, the simulation tools, end up being a requirement. So it's our hope too in putting out that work as well that, even if you're thinking about using simulations, maybe it can help to kind of boost the fidelity of that too.
Awesome. And then did that work? I'm trying to, because we've been jumping around.
So I apologize.
Did
Yeah.
that have some of those kind of guardrails in terms of the policy that you've been working on, or was that kind of without guardrails, but you don't care as much because it's in our range kind of thing?
Yeah. So yes, it was our agent system that has the control theory framing, and so it has like a tool mediation layer, and so the agent gets to look at this graph that we've displayed for how the system is built up, and it has the offensive telemetry and defensive telemetry, and from there then it can choose from like almost like a playbook of different policies that it wants. And then we have like a gated check of did the ones it selected, did they help improve the defense's posture? At the very least, did they not open up new attacks if they're like rolling back a policy or something like that? And then also making sure too, is that like a real policy that we can deploy to Defender as well. And so after those deterministic checks, that's when then we deploy those out. And so, yeah, so it was really cool to see that built in with like the system we designed as well too.
Yeah. In like a real world context, not quite
Mhm.
totally real world, not quite customer
Closer.
environment, but we're stepping up from like, proving that this might work on some local machine to something that's much more realistic in our cyber range. And
Definitely.
feel free to refine this analogy, but I'm almost thinking that what's happening here is akin to, instead of this being this giant space that the LLM can go around and choose, you're almost giving it like a multiple choice exam and saying, okay, which of these things is the best thing to do next? And then you're verifying that the things on that multiple choice exam are kind of safe and appropriate and effective things to do. Is
Yeah,
that
exactly.
approaching a good analogy?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and that seems like a fantastic way to kind of make sure that we're getting this more towards that kind of running this actually in the real world, because it seems extremely useful to have that active learning loop for sure. And then, back to technical challenges, less so on like the algorithmic side of things or, specific to that work, but when you're getting set up on the cyber range itself, did you run into any unexpected hurdles where even with Claude Code, it was like a pain in the butt to, get something running that you wanted or get things interacting? I'm just thinking about like debugging the actual
Yeah.
deploy.
Yes. I would say probably the biggest challenge. So prior to coming here, EDR was not something that I knew much about, and so I definitely
So
felt myself getting up to speed.
for our
Okay.
listeners, because maybe not everyone is super familiar
Hmm.
with EDR, and it's okay if
Yeah.
you don't even know what EDR stands
Yeah.
for, but could you give folks like a little elevator pitch on
Oh
what
yeah.
kind of an EDR system even is?
Definitely. Yeah. So I was in that category where I had no idea what this is, and I was like, this is letters. So EDR is endpoint detection and response, and so it's one of the cybersecurity tools that our blue team and defense teams can, monitor for changes in their environment. It'll come up through, evidence of like threats or potential attackers in the environment would come through in the form of alerts, and so they can look through those. And then there's also they can write in like new rules to detect more of that behavior, and they can also implement different like switches or toggles to kind of block and prevent certain behaviors from happening in the system.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think we were back to the topic, popping the stack
Yes.
of, kind of just logistical challenges with deploying on the cyber range itself.
Definitely. Yeah. And so with EDR, so first of all, just that being new to me, but then I would say that one of the challenges was trying to get that like auto like deploying of the policies set up. And so one of the reasons that was challenging was first of all required kind of looking through like their Microsoft Defender, for example, has like what's called like an advanced threat hunter like API. And so getting some of those API configs set up and trying to like pour through all their documentation, getting that set up and using that. I think also going through, Lily and I spent a while looking through like what policies would work for the cyber ranges. So some of them, when we tried it initially, there are certain dependencies of like hardware, like firmware, different things that might be required before you deploy those policies that weren't available in the code range. So we had to kind of see like what was feasible to test and what we could do there. But I would say that was probably the primary challenge on that part. And I would say, yeah, like Claude was helpful for trying to kind of like puzzle through that, and especially for digging through all of Microsoft's documentation, kind of like an advanced search engine, when you're trying to read and catch up on all that and like navigate through the portal as well.
Yeah. And, maybe transitioning from, a little bit of the day in the life to, what brought you here to Horizon 3. And it seems like your diverse background has already borne fruit in terms of the type of research that you're kind of bringing that control theory to some of the important cybersecurity research here. But talk to me, if you're comfortable, a little bit about your background prior to Horizon 3 and maybe some things that you've really enjoyed, how you've been able to kind of expand and extend that background into this next phase.
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely have a bit of more unusual background. I actually started out at Davidson College, and I got a bachelor's in science in biology, and I did an applied math minor. And then following that, I thought I wanted to go more down like a molecular bio, like PhD kind of route, but found that I really missed having like all the other components. I've always been very interdisciplinary, and so I missed having like the math and the coding and physics, and I just kind of missed having a little of everything. And so I decided to go on to do a dual degree program with WashU in St. Louis. And so after graduating from Davidson, then I went to WashU and got another bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering, with a focus, a second major
So you
in
got
systems
two
science and
bachelors.
engineer. I did, yeah.
Wow. And sequentially, it sounds like.
Yeah, so
Wow. Amazing.
yeah, it was a cool program. So I graduated after 3 years at Davidson. I did just like some advanced like coursework over the summer and took extra classes when I could. The initial goal was to save money, but then I ended up doing more school, so I don't know if
Yeah.
that panned out. But then we did 2 years, and so it's kind of like a compressed program. Like you did all your like your base requirements and like intro classes like at the first school, and then you had 2 years to like do the electrical engineering degree. So it's kind of funny. You'd have be in class with like students in their first year all the way through like third year, and get to explore different things. And then I stayed on for the master's for an additional semester to complete that work as well. Yeah, and while I was there, I did a lot of work actually in the field of like medical physics, which is a little more like radiology. And so looking at, I was using like radar tools to try and like monitor like patient movements during like radiation treatments. And then also I had some work too where we were building like QA tools and like phantoms for MRI machines. But I got into like more in the machine learning space actually once. Kind of in my last 2 semesters, I did a project on deep learning for brain MRI, where I was taking the signals from the MRI machine. And, if you can take a really fast kind of image, it's blurry, but it means the patient doesn't have to be in the machine quite as long. And so then using AI to like enhance that and get like a better quality image to really accelerate the speed. And so that was one of my first research projects in the machine learning space. And after WashU, I went on to MIT Lincoln Laboratory, where I worked with the intelligence surveillance reconnaissance group. And so I did a lot more computer vision and actually some like ultrasound work as well too, which was with our bio division. So kind of keeping that like very multidisciplinary aspects. And then I later worked with our missile defense technology group too. But I got to explore a lot of cool problems with embedded AI. And so trying to get these like models, compress them down to run at really low power, so even like less than 1 watt at times. And then also, which is crazy. And then on the other side, I got to see these like really large models,
So,
and
like,
then
for
using those for
context,
defense.
like a light bulb, is that like 50, 60 watts would be a light
I think
bulb? And so
so.
this is like
Yeah.
a fraction of a light bulb,
Hmm.
basically, in terms of
Oh yeah,
energy.
definitely. Yeah, so super crazy. We had a proposal for like an ultrasound that would kind of be worn like a band-aid, and so needing the AI for that purpose. So it's super tiny. But yeah, I really loved the work I did there, and I got into some adversarial machine learning type work as well, and like some like red teaming perspective from like the missile defense side, and that kind of started me thinking in this mindset. But how I actually came to Horizon 3 was funny. So I did a lot of volunteering with our student programs, and that was something that I really loved, the intern programs and recruiting. I probably worked with like 30 students during my time there, and it was really
Well,
great experience. And one of the projects that I mentored was for called SOCOM Ignite, and they paired RTC students from around the country with officers in the special forces. And so they would bring different challenges. And so we worked with 2 officers who are from US Cyber Command and JCOG. And they brought a challenge of working to fine tune an LLM for offensive cyber applications, which sounds very
Wow.
Horizon 3. And I loved the project. It was super cool. My students did an excellent job, and they were awarded like a technical excellence prize, and they went to present at Soft Week, which is with all the higher ups at over in the special forces. And I had a great experience with that program. I really liked the culture and everything that they brought, and kind of this like rapid iteration, but also trying to solve like very, very like relevant real world problems and delivering that research quickly. And so I'd come across later when I was looking for new opportunities, the role at Horizon 3 and the connection to the special forces. So I reached out to one of the officers that I'd been a co-mentor with, and he actually knew Corey Brunkow here.
Yeah,
And
wow,
yeah,
small world.
Corey had been his mentor forever. And so I met with Corey, and I had a great talk with him, and just loved the direction. It just seems like fantastic. And just in all my conversations, just like super interesting problems to work on, getting to kind of work with a really cool product is neat. At MIT, we, just based on the nature of it, you could never work on like a product. It was always kind of like at that before intersection, but it was kind of cool to like get the chance to work with like, some other teams. And like, I've loved working with like Amy and our other product manager. It's very cool. And so, yeah, I've been loving it. I feel like even though it's been a little bit like kind of scattered sometimes, like the different researcher areas. I feel like the underlying part of it has been, I've always loved seeing how all those seemingly like different areas connected. And so I feel like that work I mentioned earlier is like definitely a culmination of that, of like having the applied math, having like the cybersecurity, the game theory, the control theory, like all of those different components, and like seeing them all come together was super exciting to me. And then when we're working on some of the deception work too, you get some parts like behavioral, like psychology, some game theory. It's always been fascinating to me to see how that all comes together. And I love that Horizon 3 has people from like so many different backgrounds too. So I feel like that's just been so cool to learn from.
Yeah, and you have such a unique background and you're bringing all these diverse skills here to us at Horizon 3. I imagine it's not an option for us to say, we just want to clone Kerri when we're hiring new folks. But that said, what do you look for? I know we're hiring in terms of, who might be a great teammate, leader, collaborator for you as you're trailblazing in this field.
Yeah, I think probably the main thing I would say, I mean, I love that we have here like the kind of like learn it all mentality, and just, being really open to learning new areas. I feel like part of what's really cool at working at like, this like new frontier of technology is that there's a lot of unknown to everyone who's been working in the field. And so being like keeping an open mind and like being willing to explore new ideas, see how things come together. Those are things that I think are really valuable. I think I've done a lot for like recruiting for like students and things. And I think that one of the things that I would always look for is just kind of like initiative on like projects and research, getting to like explore those different ideas and taking like ownership of ideas there. And I think also just kind of making like the best of like opportunities that are given to you as well. I think if there's something comes along, just kind of diving in and exploring. And I think that's something that I see in a lot of people here at Horizon 3, of like kind of never missing like an opportunity to work on something new, or try something out. And I think that's really valuable. I think being like very like versatile is helpful. And like that's something that I don't know. I don't always expect someone I'm like hiring to be an expert in everything they're working on, but at least to, have a really solid understanding of the work that they've done, and then just be very curious and excited to learn new things.
Yeah, and on the other side, are there any, maybe just one, if you can think of one, like a red flag where you're like, this person would either not be a success here or not a great collaborator for you personally?
Yeah, I think probably the main thing that I've noticed, like occasionally that kind of like stood out, I would say if there's, like a lot of like kind of like negative towards like past teammates or something, or even just if there's sometimes like the absence of something can be assigned to. And so if there's like never any mention of other people, like that kind of helps you like to your success and things, like I think that can sometimes be something that will stand out to me. I think some of the most impressive candidates that I've interviewed really had a lot of like graciousness and like gratitude for like their mentors and the people that build them up. And that's something that's always really important to me. And I love being part of the team. And I think it's part of what makes our team go, get along really well. And I think for like us as a company, and it's something that, is a lot of what I chose in Horizon 3 when I wanted to come here, is because I saw a lot of that. So I would say that's probably one thing
Yeah.
that I would say.
Having that
Yeah.
team spirit, and if you have a lack
Mhm.
of that, that being kind of a red flag.
I think so.
Yeah. So we have that resonates a lot with me as well. Especially because something that I highlight in this research and in this work is that, the problem extends beyond a single individual. Even if you were
Yes.
superpowered, even if one of us was superpowered, like it's just too hard of a problem, securing the future that, no individual is going to be able to do it alone. And so and it's too multidisciplinary. I mean, yourself,
Yeah.
you are extremely multidisciplinary, but at the same time, like you're drawing in from product, you're drawing in from
Yeah.
customer success, sales,
Absolutely.
etc. And so the problems are bigger than an individual. So we need individuals who can engage with teams to solve them
Definitely.
for sure.
Definitely.
Anything come to mind that you feel like, given the context and conversation that we've had so far, that might be good to cover or chat about?
One thing is just that our team has been lucky to just kind of explore all these new directions. And I feel like because we've been kind of, like working on so many different areas and so many new areas, it's also meant that, we've got to talk to a lot of different teams and also get to work with we're not really like kind of like boxed into one team. It's like we really get to like work with like engineers and like product, and we flow across the company, which is cool. But I think too, just like want to continue those collaborations. And so, I I am always open to have like any conversations about this, to hear more about what somebody else is working on. And I always feel like I come away learning something. So just wanting
Yeah.
to continue that.
Yeah, and maybe that is a good segue to. I remember I met with Jimmy last week, one of our elite attack engineers, and in the last portion we covered, some of the things he enjoyed outside of work, and that helps, get to know kind of the full person. But is there anything you feel comfortable sharing that you kind of enjoy or do to relax or
Yeah.
engage with outside of your day to day here?
Sure. Yeah, so I actually I live in the Boston area. I live with my husband, and then actually with my parents as well. And then we have my sister who's been here.
Wow.
She's been home for summer. So it's been really fun. We get a lot of people to spend time with. We've gotten into playing pickleball. We have enough for like rotating teams. My husband did a lot of hockey growing up, so he and I have been learning like some figure skating actually,
Wow.
which he's quite good at. I'm still learning the basics, but it's fun and it's nice. Like I like having like a challenge. And we have 3 dogs at home, so I think they keep us busy enough. With lots of different like walks and things like that, just exploring the area. And then we do like a lot of like gardening outside as well. So yeah, those are some of the things I like to do. I also do a lot of like knitting and crocheting when I have time. I always like just pulling up like a show and getting to work on something. Just kind of like take your mind off things. It's like a relaxing thing. So I love all our channels that we have for Horizon 3. I feel like we have so many great ones for like the pets and the gardening and
Yeah, these are a
all
lot of
sorts of
our
stuff.
social channels on our
Yes.
Slack. And one of my favorite things when I have intros, if we do a group intro, someone mentions some of these interests. And it's hard to keep track of all the social channels, but you're like, oh, you like classic cars. You should join our social cars channel. Oh, you're renovating your
Yes.
house. Join the renovations channel kind of thing. And, these channels don't have huge amount of chatter on a day-to-day basis, but it's a way to kind of connect with folks. And when you're proud of a project, post it. So there's not a knitting channel, Kerri. I feel like the company might be big enough
Yeah.
to to create one. There's got to be some knitters here.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, I wanted to warmly thank you for coming on the podcast
Thank you.
today, and I want to thank our listeners as well for coming along for the ride.
See what they can't see, know what they don't know. Every hidden path, every open door. This is Recon at Horizon 3.